Good day, HENA012 class. My name is Bonani Bila. I want to take you through our poetry class for this first week. And I've decided to focus on the work of Denis Levertov. And the selected poem that I would like us to discuss is Wedding Ring. I'm sure you all know a wedding ring. For those who are married, for those who yearn to be married, you will one day, of course, put on a wedding ring. And this poem will give you a sense of what it means to wear a wedding ring. The structure of our lesson is that I will give you biographical information about the poet, and I will then read the poem and provide analysis of the work, including, giving you out some questions that you may expect, in the forthcoming test that you'll be writing on the 3rd of December. First, let us unravel, get into the details of our author, our poet. Who is Denis Levertov? Denis Levertov was born in 1923 in England. Other people call it the United Kingdom, others call it Great Britain. So she was born to a Welsh mother, but of course she remains English. And she grew up in a Christian background, but then she decided to immigrate to the United States in 1948. And this year, 1948, is very central in her development as a poet, because it's in 1948 where she met poets who were part of a poetry group, called the Mountain Poets. And these poets were, Charles Olson, Robert Creeley, Robert Duncan. And these were poets who were so much inspired by the imaginative and objectivist work of, William Carlos Williams. William Carlos Williams was regarded as an organicist poet, who had decided to break away from the structured, stringent kind of poetry that emphasized, rhyme and, and meter. So these are technical aspects that oftentimes we talk about in poetry. What's the rhyme scheme? Is it A, B, or A, B, C, that kind of stuff and so on. So Denis Levertov was inspired by the work of William Carlos Williams and the other poets that I've mentioned, because they felt poetry should communicate feelings and it should not just be technical, in as much as it's supposed to be precise, concise, and maintain all aspects of brevity. So what makes Denis Levertov very important? I'll just state a few aspects that I think make her very significant as a poet. She's regarded as a poet of spiritual curiosity. Like I said, she grew up in the context of Christian background. So she's a poet who has faith in God, and so the spiritual aspect becomes very evident in most of her poems. And at the same time, she's regarded as a poet of personal experience and relationships. And the poem that we've selected, Wedding Ring, suggests that she's a poet of personal experience, a poet of relationships. And in addition to this poem, The Wedding Ring, she's written several other poems on marriage, like Divorcing. The other poems called The Ache of Marriage. And I've included these poems in the conspect that I've just developed, so in the notes that I have distributed, I've uploaded, you will meet these poems, you'll encounter these poems. He's also regarded as a poet, who a poet of memory, a poet of social memory, and equally a poet of commemoration. So a poet of social memory suggests that she would be a chronicler, a recorder, someone who will commentate on what's going on in the social environment, what's going on in her own surroundings, what's going on in society. So she would not make a distinction between her own personal life and the life of the larger community. So she saw herself as a part of community and not, walk aloof and, maintain the kind of status of a celebrity as if she's not part of the community. So she saw herself as part of the community. And for that reason, she became very active as an activist, campaigning for the rights of women to be respected, the rights of children to be taken into account, the right of, the vulnerable to be, respected as well. And in the 1960s, she condemned the involvement of the, US government in the Vietnam War. So that kind of activism, shines through in most of her poems. And other people know her as an activist for climate change, for climate justice. So they are poems that she's written that resonate with eco-poetics, with eco-justice, with environmental concerns, that, the world is faced with serious, serious challenges. And if we don't do anything, we'll all, be consumed by, the dangers of global warming. And so she could not be silent, on these kind of issues. And what kind of poems did she write? She wrote mainly, short poems anchored in lyricism. That is, the musicality of the poems would always shine through in her work. She wrote poems that were usually, encounters with reality. And this is shown clearly in the poem Wedding Ring. It may not be an experience, but it could as well be an experience of someone that she knew, or, what people in a community, in a country, would go through. So that's very important. And I also want to mention that she wrote several poems, in her life. She wrote more than 20 books, 20 collections, 20, volumes of poems. So to write 20 volumes of poems, of poetry books, you really need to be prolific. And she was such a prolific, poet. So in a nutshell, that is, the kind of poet that I'm trying to introduce you to today. Very important poet who, could be compared to Rainer Maria Rilke. She could be compared to some of the best voices that, the world of poetry has produced. Yeah. So let us go through this poem, Wedding Ring. I'll read it out loud, and I hope you listen attentively and, apply the tools for analyzing poetry that you've probably, learned in the first semester in HENA011. Wedding ring. My wedding ring lies in a basket, as if at the bottom of a well. Nothing will come to fish it back up and onto my finger again. It lies among keys to abandoned houses, nails waiting to be kneaded and hammered into some wall, telephone numbers with no names attached, idle paper clips. It can't be given away for fear of bringing ill luck. It can't be sold, for the marriage was good in its own time, though that time is gone. Could some artificer beat into it bright stones, transform it into a dazzling circlet no one could take for solemn betrothal or to make promises living will not let them keep. Change it into a simple gift I could give in friendship. So this is a poem that I think it's critical that we interpret, we untangle it, we break it down into small chunks so that we understand. And this is about mastery of the tools for analyzing poetry. What do we need to do when we analyze poetry? I'm sure you've got lots of answers and experience in analyzing poetry. But for me, what stands out when I analyze a poem, I ask myself, what is this poem all about? Does it move me? Does it make me feel like, oh, I want to sleep, I want to doze? Or do I feel like, oh, now I can cry, because this poem really speaks the language that, evokes feeling in me? Um, yeah, so does the poem move me, Yeah. And thereafter, of course, then I can ask myself, what makes this poem move me? Is it the language, the choice of language that the poet has, used in the work? What is called diction, you know, and what kind of language is used? Is it connotative? Is it denotative? Is it simple, plain language, pedestrian kind of language? Or is it language that is full of intensity, that is dense, metaphorical, full of layered meanings? Or so the kind of language that the poet chooses oftentimes becomes central to communicating the kind of feeling that the poet wants to transfer to the reader. And of course, you also need to understand the style that the poet has chosen, to communicate the kind of idea and experience and encounter the kind of feeling. So when we read the poem, you know, um, wedding ring, what is it that we get? And there are a number of things that we should ask ourselves after reading a good poem, a poignant poem of this nature. One is, what are the symbols that we find in the poem? I'll give an example. The poem is called Wedding Ring. Is this a literal or figurative, kind of expression? And you make up your mind when it comes to that. So the opening lines indicate, my wedding ring lies in a basket as if at the bottom of a well. Nothing will come to fish it back up and onto my finger again. So the poet, the narrator, the speaker in the poem, it's saying that this ring, this wedding ring, is no longer attached to the finger. It actually lies in a basket as if at the bottom of a well. So, the basket may not be as, you know, deep and like a well, but here the comparison is made between the basket and a well. And the narrator suggests that this ring lies in a basket as if it's at the bottom of a well. Can we reach the bottom of a well? Of course we may, but that may as well suggest that the wedding ring has become obsolete. And when the wedding ring has become obsolete, what does that mean? It probably means that the relationship is dysfunctional. It's not working anymore. It's tired. There isn't any ounce of positivity, any moment of pleasure in the kind of relationship. So it's lonely, it's empty, it's hollow, it's a marriage that is on the rocks. you know it's a marriage that is icy cold, it's in ICU. And she goes on to say, it lies, and this refers to the wedding ring. It lies among keys to abandoned houses, nails waiting to be kneaded and hammered into some wall, telephone numbers with no names attached, idle paper clips. So these are the things that are found right there in a basket. All these abandoned, objects, all these obsolete objects, you know, the paper clips that lie idle, the telephone numbers that are not in use anymore with no names attached to them. That suggests that even this wedding ring has become meaningless. It doesn't carry the kind of romantic expression, that it used to. It doesn't have the kind of power that we know marriage as an institution is supposed to carry. So this is what we have, and as you know that many times, simple objects in people's lives, you know, um, can come to represent a part of themselves, and the object can also become an integral part of a person's identity. So in the poem Wedding Ring, what the poet Denis Levertov tries to do is the relationship between a woman and her old wedding ring, which is explored as a way to intertwine the woman's life with the ring, with the ring's message, with the ring, with the meaning of the ring. And what is the meaning of the ring here? The meaning of the wedding ring suggests marriage, of course, but what kind of marriage are we encountering in this poem? So through the ring, the woman identifies herself. She tries to claim her identity, and the wedding ring is wishfully transformed into a complex symbol of promises to a simple gift of friendship. And that's what I think is at the crux of this poem. So in the opening, lines of the poem, the author sets the tone of the poem by exemplifying the interaction between the speaker's feelings and the wedding ring. She says, "My wedding ring lies in a basket as if at the bottom of a well." The first two lines of the poem paints a picture of a lonely woman trying to depart with the last memory of a marriage. you know. So the last memory of a marriage, other people would probably say, but maybe, is a kind of romantic night that I had with my, partner, or it's, the ride that we took to the mall or to some pleasure resort or whatever. But in fact, in this instance, we are reminded that the last memory of a wedding, remain of a marriage, in this instance remains that wedding ring. Once you remove it, it's like you are saying, bye bye this marriage, So even for those who cheat, they cannot often cheat with a wedding ring on. So for them to be at ease with their, deviant kind of, actions, they've got to take off the wedding ring so that they can at least be at ease. So, but the narrator in this poem, it's so concerned that once the wedding ring is off, of course, that suggests, the end of marriage. Yeah. So that I think it's critical, to understand. Yeah. And what are the other objects that the narrator, tells us that indicate that there's emptiness, in this relationship? The poet, the narrator rather, speaks of, paper clips and, telephone numbers without names attached to that, and so on and so on. So that suggests that there's loneliness, there's, emptiness in the relationship. So in brief, that's part of what I thought, maybe we could derive from the poem itself. And from the poem, then we create specific questions that you may find useful as you continue your exploration of the poem itself. There's one question that you may meet in your exam or even the test, and this question is about the representations, the symbols that are used in the poem. What are the symbols that we find in the poem? One key symbol that we find is the wedding ring. What does it symbolize? Do you think the wedding ring symbolizes, wonderful dreams, for instance? I don't think so. Do you think it represents, deep commitment and a promising future? I doubt. You know, for me, it represents love that's gone sour. It represents lost dreams and what used to be. And we also need to determine who the narrator of this poem is. This is the narrator who is cataloging, detailing a relationship, a marriage that has disintegrated. Is it a man? Is it a woman? Is it a young boy? Is it a priest? Is it some kind of an adolescent? And I'm sure you have an answer. The speaker in the poem, the narrator, the voice, the persona in the poem is a woman. And, we also need to ask ourselves, what would then be the appropriate description of the tone of this poem? When we read this poem, you know, what sort of energy, is transferred to us? Do we become so excited and elated and so joyful and happy, and then we begin to climb up and down because, oh, yeah, this poem, The Wedding Ring, it was presented in such a great manner? I don't think so. You know, is it a poem that is full of contentment and ease? I doubt. you know. So are the words in the poem, do they leave you as a reader feeling that the author wanted the marriage to end? Maybe, you know. Uh, so what I think is happening in the poem, it's a state of sadness and that suggests, sharp disillusionment concerning the end of a relationship. This person, it's sad that this relationship, it's ending, and that a wish is that maybe this ring, can be turned into something bright, something more shiny. Uh, but maybe it is better to keep it right there, um, in the basket, because if she decides to sell it to a friend or to sell it in the market, it may attract ill luck, it may attract bad luck. So she doesn't want to be, you know, uh, to experiment, to go through troubles, to go through such, you know, traumatizing experience because of the wedding ring. And her hope is only perhaps if only this ring could be, chiseled and kneaded and hammered into something else, maybe a bracelet, maybe a circlet, maybe a crown, then she would feel better. But at the same time, she's aware that a wedding ring is not something that you can exchange as a gift. You can't give it to a friend, even if you don't want that ring anymore. It's expensive, but it carries a lot of emotions. So if you give it away, still, it doesn't mean that you'll be settled. So that's something that we pick up in the poem. And as we continue to analyze the poem, we also need to understand, what are some of the difficult ways that the poet is used in the poem. You will discover, a word like circlet. You need to find out what then is the meaning of the word circlet. Other people then ask themselves, what is the word? Betrothal. What does it mean? And that is why, as English candidates, you always need to have with you, your dictionary, so that I don't get into the trouble of explaining ways that that you can easily find answers on your own. There's a word like dazzling. So try to understand these ways in the context of their use in the poem. And it is simple to find those meanings. And in this poem, there aren't, a number of difficult ways. So, but then as part of analysis, identify those ways and provide relevant contextual meaning to those. So, yeah. And like I pointed out in your HENA 01 HENA011, I'm sure you dealt with a number of poetic devices. Those will assist you to interpret the poem better. For instance, here there's a phrase, my wedding ring lies in a basket as if at the bottom of a well. What do you consider this to be? Is it an oxymoron? Is it a metaphor? Is it onomatopoeia? Is it a simile? Or is it context? So, your knowledge of um, poetic devices will help you realize that, but this is not anything difficult, and easy. It would be easy to relate to that, you know. Um, so the other aspect, of course, of analyzing poetry is to understand its form. What is the form that the poem has assumed? You know, so for instance, this poem doesn't have any rhythmic, or rhyming structure. It does have rhythm. There is musicality in it, but it doesn't have a systemic, rhyming pattern, and it appears to be, more in a paragraph form. You must ask yourself why. Is it because it's a free verse? Is it because people can relate to this poem and empathize with the author over the end of a relationship and the resultant changes in their life? Is it because it relates to everyday experience? So all of the above, these are all they all hold true to the decision that the poet has decided, has acted upon, making this poem not to have a particular rhyming pattern, because she really wanted people to relate to the poem. She didn't want the poem to be, you know, uh, limited by technicalities. Yeah. So, fellow, HENA012 colleagues and candidates, this is we've come to the end of our lesson, and I'm sure you're going to enjoy poetry and see the relevance of poetry in your everyday experience, in your everyday life, in your encounters with your social realities. Just like Levertov, did, combining the personal and the public, combining personal experiences with events happening around them. And I wish you all the best in your upcoming test, and of course subsequently in your exams. So you take care, and may God bless you all. I wish all of you success in your endeavors. Thank you.